Hey, deserved listeners, a lot of you have been sending me this interview with Aaliyah on the podcast and YouTube channel called Hanging with the Hamiltons, which has Cam and Lauren from season 1. Let's watch.
But it was very nice. I felt like I was in high school again, dating, spending hours upon hours on the phone, talking to my crush. I felt like it was safe to be mushy and to be expressive.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's interesting to hear that. In the pods, it is like high school again, where you're on the phone all night long and there's no distractions. You don't have any responsibilities that are interfering, like jobs or that sort of stuff. And also, you are safe to be mushy. You are encouraged, and everyone is there to be mushy, kind of a thing. You know, when you're online dating or dating in the real world, and there's always that feeling each other out. I feel like I want to go a little bit further, but do they want? Should I text them now, or should I wait a couple days? Where are they? Where are we going? Are they dating anyone else? Do they like me as much as I like them? There's all this tentativeness that will be, appropriate, I suppose, to the situation, but can absolutely interfere with one's communication and trust, and with, you just wonder how many people could have worked out if they knew that the other person liked them. Along those lines, when I was in high school, long story short, a friend of she's still a friend of mine, but I liked her when I was in 9th grade, and apparently she liked me, but we didn't know it. But we had a friend in between us who, I'm not even joking, it's straight out of a John Hughes movie. He told her that I knew she liked me, but I didn't like her. And then he told me that she knew that I liked her and that she didn't like me. Does that make sense? But I didn't know this. He was a close friend for a bit. And then fast forward a few years later, we had become friends, and we were always friends through this whole time anyway, but we had become closer friends. And then, as we were graduating, she told me her side of the story, and we matched each other's. We told our side of the story, and we were like, wait, what? So this whole time, and our so-called friend was interfering. Why? To keep me for him, or to keep her for him, which never really happened. I don't know. So it was one of those things. And you just imagine when you're in the pods that it's encouraging you, and the other person is there to meet a person that they want to marry, right? Like, imagine if they had that. They must have that, right? Some online dating service where it's like, people only come here looking for a lifelong partner. This is not for hookups. But I imagine that apps like that or sites like that don't do very well, because the majority of people are at least open to both. I don't know. But, imagine that you're in the pods and you don't have anything else to do. It's like your one thing that you're there to do is to be mushy, and you start to be mushy and the other person's mushy, and you're like, ooh, let's all be mushy together. And then the love and the expression and the facilitate. I've often wondered about that. You just think, well, for Cameron and Lauren, you think, well, they were destined, they were fated to be together. They're maybe perfect for each other. Who knows? Depending on your point of view. But a lot of people do think that way, right? That if they had met outside of the pods, of course, they would have been, eventually, maybe it takes a little longer, but they would have been together. I'm guessing some of the couples believe that about themselves. But it's also very possible that the intensity and the format absolutely pushes them together. Yeah, and that's not bad. It just means that the road to feeling dedicated and in love with someone isn't necessarily just fate and compatibility. There's a lot of other factors that play into it.
That relationship that I was in, I was young, in my early mid-20s. And I had been friends with this individual for some time before we became a couple.
Okay, so she is talking about the infidelity that was discussed on the show.
We were both transitioning in our lives from being college students to going into our profession. So me being a nurse and him in his respected field, studying for licenses and just, trying to get our feet off the ground. And I think, we were young and a bit emotionally immature on both sides. I was on the receiving end of infidelity as well in the relationship. But in the moment when I was explaining all of this to Uche,
Okay, so we're hearing that he cheated on her as well, according to her, which sounds believable. But now she's about to talk about the moment that she explained it. I said this during the episode when this was aired. I eventually said that I believed that she did have a good take on the narrative about the infidelity. I didn't think that she came across like someone that was psychopathic or callous or hurtful to other people on purpose, like she cheated and said, I cheated and I don't care about my boyfriend. But the things that she was saying was alarming to someone like that would be dating her, that would be thinking about spending the rest of their life with her because of the things she said initially. Eventually, she said that she felt guilty, but she left that out. And it seemed to me like she hadn't really processed the whole thing, which is normal for people to do. I would say the vast majority of people, if I were to ask them to tell me the story about their infidelity in the past, they would have a very similar narrative that she did, meaning that they had the infidelity. It was a painful time for them in a lot of ways. It usually is. And it caused a lot of strife. And then the relationship ended, perhaps. And then they just moved on with their lives. They didn't go to therapy, or if they did, they didn't discuss the infidelity. Or if they did, the therapist didn't necessarily focus on developing the narrative like I might. Plenty of therapists would operate like me for sure, but anecdotally, other therapists might not. Meaning that for me, when I have clients and they tell me whether it's infidelity or they were on the borderline of being abusive to their past partner, or they were hurtful in the relationship in some way, or they were deceiving coworkers for some reason, like I don't know. I had a client once who was stealing from the cash register and got caught and was actually mandated to work with me. And so it's not my job, and I have zero interest in making people feel making people feel ashamed of themselves. I don't even like to do that in my personal life. It's just not how I think, at least I think. But particularly as a therapist, I am in a very different mindset. I am there to help. I'm focused on how I can help them. And if helping someone means that I support them, then I do that. If helping someone means that I help them to see how they broke from their own integrity or why they committed that transgression on other people, then I will do that. For a lot of clients that are telling me about past infidelity, I believe that it is very important that we understand what led up to that and why they made that choice to harm other people. Infidelity, by its nature, is harming your partner, whether they know about it or not. And I don't think we need to debate that, right? So I don't want them to harm others because I care about other people, but also it doesn't serve themselves. The client is not, their needs aren't met by harming other people. One, it is there's a lot of guilt and shame, but two, it's a symptom of a larger problem almost all the time, if not all the time, that it has to do with their needs. With Aaliyah, I'm guessing that in this relationship, she was hurting and maybe unsure about things and having a hard time communicating with him, with her past boyfriend. And there were a lot of issues and a lot of things that she could have addressed if she had someone there to help her, or if she felt supported, or if she had enough experience or models to follow, that probably either would have resulted in her addressing the relationship and improving it, or ending it, because at some point she would discover that it was not salvageable, or that she was worried about being alone. A lot of people will not break up. She even said that. I was worried about being alone. So what support was around her regarding that? What sort of relational traumas about that loss or being alone were present for her that could have been healed if she had enough people around her, or therapists, or whatever. So when I focus for clients on past infidelity, it illuminates all of those things. It's not that I'm there to shame the person at all. However, if someone is refusing to acknowledge that they are harming other people through stealing from the register at work or cheating on their partner or being abusive or calling their partner names or disregarding other people's feelings, if they are having a hard time acknowledging that and they're not a psychopath, meaning that the client does have the capacity for empathy, then it is not only something to focus on for the client's needs, but I also just generally care about society, and I don't want people to hurt other people for no legitimate reason. And if I have a client in front of me, it's sort of like if I've had clients who were bigots about either gender or race or disability or age. And even though it might not necessarily serve the therapeutic goals to address those things, I do consider it a responsibility, and I gladly accept that mantle to help society by addressing that. I'm not going to chastise a client and yell at them. I'm going to say, well, let's look at that. Let's talk about that. If a client were racist and they were espousing racist points of view, which I have had clients like that for sure, and I will say, well, let's evaluate, let's look at that sentence that you just said. What do you mean by that? Where does it come from? Who told you that? What are the assumptions in there? Did you know that might actually hurt other people, even if you just have that thought? Because it'll probably come through in your behavior, whether you want it to or not. How do you feel about that? Now, if someone is shamed by that or they feel chastised by me, I suppose that's a risk that I'm willing to take, because I just don't want harm to be happening in the world, in the same way of infidelity. Infidelity does harm. Now, she's saying that he cheated on her. Maybe he cheated on her countless times and she cheated once. Okay, it's all in the consideration. But what led up to that, right? And in all likelihood, it probably wasn't vindictive on her part, like I'm going to get him back by cheating, or I'm going to show him. It probably was an act out of desperation, out of loneliness, out of just not knowing what to do, out of just looking for a reprieve, looking for approval, looking for someone to validate that she's still attractive or whatever, and those are all understandable things. And through illuminating that, it will definitely help in the future, not with avoiding infidelity, but more basically getting your needs met.
I really didn't want to focus on, well, this happened and then this happened and then this happened. Like I didn't want to kind of go through the jab for jabs. It was a toxic relationship. And I think a lot of people can relate to being young.
By toxic, I'm going to take a guess and say that there was a lot of conflict, maybe even abuse. I don't know. But that's usually what people mean by those terms. And okay. But again, she can have whatever narrative she wants. But if you're someone on the verge of getting engaged with her, then you're looking. Now, us, we don't care, because she can have her point of view and it doesn't impact us directly. But for Uche, he was in this position of trying to determine if she is a good partner. And this is a pretty major detail that you would want to know. How do they see infidelity, and how do they narrativize past infidelity? Now, of course, when we know what we know about Uche and the fact that he was lying to Aaliyah that whole time about Lydia, really just throws it all off. But I think that people often, when they're watching shows like this, they'll say, who is the good one and who's the bad one? There's always some sort of black and white way of looking at it. And I'm going to take a guess and say that most people are like, Uche is the bad one and Aaliyah is the good one. And therefore, if there's any criticism or any kind of questioning of Aaliyah, who is the good one, then people are like, Aaliyah's not the bad one, Uche's the bad one. And yeah, both people, everyone, me, you, Aaliyah, Cameron, and Lauren, and everybody, we all have problems and blind spots and denials and traumas and habits and bad moods. So all of us have things to work on, and Aaliyah does too, just like Uche. Maybe Uche has more, depending. But just because we're looking at Aaliyah and her narrative in terms of what's fair. Because, the other thing that I'm always concerned about is, generally speaking, our culture, because there are certain movements within our culture that are not wise, right? Like materialism or climate change denial, right? Science denial, that sort of, there are movements that are problematic, not only for me, but also for the individual that's participating in that movement willingly, right? And one of the cultural movements that I'm not super sure about this, but in my observation, it seems like there's a lot of excuse making for people when they are cheating, especially if they're a likable person. Even if it's like a friend, that cheated in the past, even if the cheating was pretty horrific, if you have a friend that did that, there's a tendency to be like, well, I'm sure you had your reasons, or, you're a good person, so, let's not talk about that. And I feel like that denies everybody the opportunity to address all the things that I've been talking about. So I think that as I am promoting these ideas on this channel, I'm trying to make it way more nuanced than typically the way it's discussed, at least in my observation.
And so I really was hoping that the conversation would evolve into me talking about the fact that I went into therapy after that relationship, that I had read like a ton of self-help books.
Okay, that's interesting. I actually wouldn't have intuited that based on the edit and based on what she was saying. And she's saying, I was hoping the conversation would evolve into. So that could be a factor that is causing maybe problems in Aaliyah's life, because she had all the ability to blurt that out at any point. that conversation, even in the edit, and of course I'm guessing had a lot more time to talk about it. She had multiple moments where she could have blurted out, by the way, I was very mortified by the fact that I had not only cheated, but all the things that happened in that relationship. And so I went to therapy. I talked about the infidelity. I read a lot of self-help books. I felt horrible. We heard a little bit of that toward the end where she said, I felt guilty and I hated myself or something like that. But that was toward the end. The first 6 to 10 things that she said in the beginning that were things like, well, he wasn't satisfying me sexually. I think that was the first thing she said. So that's interesting, right? Why was that why were the first number of things that she said justifying her infidelity, right? I'm guessing deep down she doesn't justify it to herself, but what was present? Now, you could argue that, given what we know now about Uche, that their dynamic, and what we know about Aaliyah, that already an imbalance was happening in their relationship, that she felt that she had to prove herself. It's sort of like when I, as a therapist, would work with teens, and I would ask them a question like, how often do you smoke pot, for example? And this is after I give them a whole caveat of, I am not your parent, I'm not your therapist. I am your therapist. I'm not your teacher. I'm not a cop. I do not care if you are doing things like smoking weed or sneaking out at night. I mean, I care because I might worry about you, but it is not my responsibility to parent you or discipline you, and I will never tell anyone if you tell me things along those lines. If you tell me these things, like you're being abused, or someone else is being abused, or blah, 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 these things I am mandated to report. But the vast, vast majority of things that you could tell me, like you shoplift every day, I might want to talk with that. I might want to talk about that with you, but I will never guilt trip you or out you or call the cops. In fact, not only is that just not how I want to be as a therapist and as a human being, but it also doesn't help in terms of gaining your trust. And also, it might even be against my ethical codes in a lot of ways, depending on the situation, such that I might even lose my license if I broke that confidentiality. So, long caveat. And then I would ask him, okay, well, you tested positive for weed. It's no skin off my back, but how often do you smoke? I was just curious, maybe. And they'd be like, what do you mean? I'm not smoking pot. Who told you I smoke pot? I'd be like, no. You're responding to me like I'm a cop, and I know I'm an adult, and I might be one of the only adults, if not the only adult, who truly does not care if you smoke pot. So just know that I don't care. So I'm just curious. And I would get, for some teenagers, we just never made that transition where they saw me as a therapist instead of a teacher or something like that. So anyway, it's possible that with Aaliyah, she, because of the dynamic that was happening, because we saw Aaliyah with both Lydia and with Uche, and it's possible that for Uche and Lydia, they're both bulldozers, right? And for Aaliyah, she will succumb, maybe even want that kind of configuration because she's used to it or something. I mean, she seemed very comfortable with Lydia for a long time, seemingly, where I think a lot of others, like I was saying myself, if I had a friend in the pods that was like, look at me, I'd be like, I have to back away from this person. Like, I don't know what's going on here, but it doesn't feel good to me. So, but Aaliyah not only was responding to that, but then we see a clip later where she's like totally glomming on to Lydia. Lydia, if you just look at body language, Lydia looks like mom and Aaliyah look like child. I don't know. There's nothing wrong with cuddling, but I'm just saying that it's possible that for Aaliyah, even early on, she felt bulldozed, and she also is comfortable with being bulldozed unfairly to her. And in that moment, she feels like a teenager trying to justify herself to somebody. And she's in that mode of just like, look, it was a horrible relationship. That's why I cheated. Instead of slowing down, because right now she's speaking from a different voice. Do you hear that? She seems much more on top of things, much more adult-like, I would say. So I wonder if that's why she was saying those justifications initially.
And emotional intelligence, EQ, 2.0, like that's one of my favorites that I read about narcissism and attachment styles and just different things, because I wasn't educated on this stuff. And it was something that I really needed to take time to learn before going into another relationship. I realized like I did have a lot of things and a lot of issues on my end that weren't healthy, and I wanted to work on myself.
Yeah. So I didn't know, but I imagined something like this, the things that she's saying was in her. But for some reason, the guess that I had at the time, I didn't think about this because we didn't see this yet. This is the first time we saw Uche in that voice. But for me, the only hypothesis that really popped into my head was that Aaliyah just hadn't really thought about it much, but clearly she had. It sounded like the way someone would talk right after the infidelity, where they haven't had the time to explore everything and to mull everything over. And so that's the only thing I thought. It's like, I think she actually is level-headed, but the way she's responding at first seems like someone that hasn't really thought about it, but clearly she did. So I think that really does lend itself to that hypothesis that there was this dynamic happening, and the fact that now she's saying, I was hoping it would evolve to. I would love to ask her, well, when you said you were hoping it to evolve to, what do you mean by that? And I don't know what she would say, but what I'd want to know is, why didn't you just say that? What was preventing you from saying? What was the vibe in the room? What were you worried about? Was it the pods? And I've said this before about Aaliyah, the way in which she bolted from the pods, it points to that the context of the pods, that they're cut off from everybody. They have absolutely, seemingly, according to the producers, and I think Aaliyah would attest to this, they have the ability to walk away from the show whenever they want, right? There might be cult-like mechanisms in place and pressure to sort of brainwash them away from that. Hard to know. But anyway, while you're in the pods anyway, you're completely cut off from everybody, and it would feel very unsafe to me if I were in her shoes and I was in that situation and I was just learning that Lydia and Uche used to date, and there's details that seemingly are a little shady because Lydia's saying one thing and Uche's saying another, and I was in love with Uche and Lydia. The two people that I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with and be closest to for the rest of my life were Lydia and Uche, and now I find out that it would really screw up my mind, and I'd be like, I would literally be afraid. My heart would be racing, and I'd be like, get me the F out of here. I don't know what's happening. I want to go home. I want to just crawl under the covers, and I want to talk to someone that I know I can trust and sort of sift through all this stuff. I would feel unsafe. So, it's possible that she felt generally unsafe in the pods, which we could imagine even before those things happened. And that caused her to be a little restricted in her in her communication. I think we're maybe seeing that. We also saw that when Uche and Aaliyah met up at that cafe or restaurant, because this version of Aaliyah is very different. Is she not?
And that's why it was really hurtful. And I felt so judged by Uche because I didn't really get a chance to really dive deeper because I felt myself shutting down just based off the tone.
Okay. So I think that's in that camp that I was talking about, that his tone, which I didn't know how to interpret at first. It was definitely a tone, but it's interesting how these things develop, right? And of course, later on, we see Uche with more tone, right? But with Aaliyah, she says she shut down. Okay, so we can relate to Aaliyah because I think for a lot of viewers, they look at Uche and go like, "Gah," and Aaliyah is much more sympathetic, right? But we can also look at how that's a factor that leads to problems, maybe even infidelity if it grows out of control, is that tendency to defend, and then shut down, right? Instead of this version of standing up and saying, no, let me explain. It was a tough time for sure, but I absolutely took it very seriously. I went to therapy. I read a lot of self-help books, and I knew that there was something about me that I needed to work on as to why I cheated. So if she would have done that, and this is more relevant for us in the real world, is that typically when couples come into my office, there's something that's happening where there's over time, both people are contributing to this dynamic, or whether it's this dynamic or pursuing and distancing or whatever. There's various different modes. Also, there's parentification and under functioning, this kind of thing. And each person is doing it. It's much easier to identify the above person as the problem, right? The bulldozers, the Uches, this kind of thing. But it's important to recognize that, not all the time, for sure, but often both people are contributing, and both people, if they work on things, then, because the couple is in my office, if both people work on things, then the imbalance won't cascade on itself. Now, I often will start and be more pointed towards the above person because they're ultimately causing a lot of havoc through their power play and stuff. But at the same time, if, for example, with overfunctioning and underfunctioning, well, let's just take this dynamic because we don't get to talk about this very often. So if you've ever had a relationship with someone where they tended to shut down, where they tended to almost like infantilize themselves or regress, I guess is a better term, and they will defend and not speak from a voice of maturity. I'm trying to think of a common scenario that you might see with like a partner where you go to them and you say like, hey, we need to talk about what happened last night. And they're like, well, what? I don't understand. What are you talking about? Even though you absolutely know they know what you're talking about. So that'd be one scenario. Another one might be that, say you go to your partner to talk about emotions or even talk about going to therapy, and your partner's just like, I don't need therapy. What are you talking about? That's, I don't know, it depends on the situation, but that is a version of what I'm talking about, where they are afraid of going there. And instead of addressing it like she is now and demonstrating that she has the power and the wherewithal and the wisdom to look at all the nuances, instead it's just avoidance, right? It's just it's like you're a mom and coming to them and saying, hey, you have a cavity, we have to go to the dentist, and the kid's just like, what are you talking about? I don't have anything wrong with me. It's that kind of thing, because the kid is operating from a place of immaturity and a place of avoidance, and they don't have wisdom yet. And so you have to actually get the kid, or the kid is avoiding going to the doctor, the kid is avoiding talking to their teacher, the kid is avoiding talking with their friend, or whatever, they're avoiding because they're scared. And when you have a partner that does that, it can be very frustrating because, especially if you also have kids, because you need your partner to, rise above that. It's okay to be afraid, but you can't just avoid the whole thing, right? You have to stand up. I mean, if you don't, then I have to do it double, and then you get frustrated with that, right? So it's natural when you're in this position, as someone starts to avoid and to give up and to also shut down. And, a lot of it's involuntary. It's not necessarily something they have control over, but there's a pathway through therapy and addressing that. At least you can notice it when it's happening and talk about it. But anyway, so the person does that. It's just it's very frustrating, and so it doesn't justify this movement, but it does explain it. It's easier to identify with Aaliyah because we know what Uche does to have this sympathy for people in Aaliyah's shoes. Are just like, well, geez, I mean, what is he going to do to that guy? And I don't know about their dynamic, but it's possible that for the two of them, that they both kind of contribute, because imagine if she said something like this in the moment, if she had the capacity or the reactivity, the typical pattern of as soon as someone asked her about that, instead of like shutting down, as she says, she actually ramps up and says, oh, no, let me get out of this. You got to listen to me. I got a whole story here. That's kind of my style. It's like, as you could imagine. And that's not shutting down, right? And might that have actually helped Uche to not bulldoze? It's natural to believe that Uche is a bulldozer and he will bulldoze no matter what. And that is possible, but it's also because that's our typical labeling system is, narcissism and whatever. It's always one person's fault. All problems derive from within a person, which isn't always true. It can, but a lot of times, especially when we're talking about couples, the problem derives from the couple's pattern that each person comes to the table with, their relational traumas and their denials and their defenses, and things get out of whack. And so that's something that we can think about. I don't know about them, but we can think about for ourselves. And this is all within systems theory, by the way, which is what marriage and family therapists, couple and family therapists are trained in, to not just look at you're a problem. It's more like, okay, what's the pattern here, and how do we correct for that?
But, in the moment, I tried to be empathetic to the fact that, yes, this man is scared now. This is a concerning conversation. This is a concerning revelation for him. That is totally fair, and I wanted to validate his feelings because.
Yeah, Aaliyah is very wise and very differentiated. And wow, I don't know. I'm so surprised that anyone on a reality TV show would say what she just said. That almost is never said by people in her shoes. So it's strange that it's so rare that let's rewind that.
This is a concerning conversation. This is a concerning revelation for him. That is totally fair, and I wanted to validate his feelings because as a woman, I think, or anybody, hearing that, and you're pursuing marriage, you would be a little scared.
Okay, yeah, wow, yeah, that's great. So yeah, but it sounds like what she was saying in the moment, because of his demeanor, or she wasn't ready for it, that she just shut down and was just either regressing or just trying to defend or something, and that resulted in it cascading. And then we had what we had.
With Uche, he had told me that they dated for 3 weeks in 2020. Yeah. And that was it. That's why when I first talked to Uche.
Okay, so I think what we're hearing is she's saying that Uche said that he and Lydia dated several months ago. So, if they were somewhere, maybe they were in 2022 or something, like 2 years earlier, that he dated Lydia for 3 months. And then Lydia's like, no, we just broke up a few months ago. And I don't remember hearing that inconsistency, or maybe I lost the thread there, but at the very least, that's what she's saying. And I think that's completely possible. And yeah, that would be very disconcerting if you're in Aaliyah's shoes. You're just like, what is happening? And I don't know who's lying to me. I thought Uche was my fiance, my forever person, and then Lydia was going to be my new very, very closest best friend. And now I'm hearing these two stories. Are they in on it together? That seems weird. Are they both trying to screw me over? What's happening here? And I just need to get out of here. Yeah, I think that's what she's saying. Yeah, for Uche, you think, dude. Now, from his perspective, it's possible that he thinks, well, we dated seriously for 3 months because we were exclusive in 2020. And then we were on and off again for a long time. We heard him tell the story about how he got back together with her when she had a loss, Lydia had a loss in her life. It's possible that he frames that as not actually together. Who knows? But you would think, given where Uche was coming from, the position that he was in and the position that Aaliyah was in, that you would be fully disclosing of what happened. You'd be like, well, I don't know how to define it, but we were, you could argue, kind of an on-again, off-again couple or whatever, dating relationship since this date and this date. And there were times that we were apart in that span of time. I could give you the whole rundown, I suppose, but the last time we were intimate was 3 months ago. But I don't know if I would call that we were actually dating at the time. It was kind of a one-off, whatever his story was. You just think you would want that to be said to Aaliyah. But, I think a lot of people, they want to downplay things because they're worried that they're going to lose someone. So they will spin the truth or just flat out lie or obscure things or frame things in their mind, hoping that the other person will accept it, and they believe that it sets them up. You can imagine for Uche just being like, I need to downplay this relationship with Lydia, to the most, because, is that a phrase? To the max, from the 80s. Everything was to the max in the 80s. And you can imagine that for Uche, he's thinking, I need to make this as minimal as possible. And so I'm going to err on the side of saying, well, we were on and off, but I'm just going to highlight those 3 months where we were serious. And so, we broke up a long time ago, instead of thinking big picture that if the truth comes out and the nuance comes out, then it could be seen as lying, which you could argue it is.
I'm like, oh yeah, we could get past this. We can work through this. This is big news, but we can work through this. This isn't as deep as, I was thinking when you first said it, when you first came out of your mouth, I was like, but 3 weeks, 2020, you didn't make it past a certain point. Okay, maybe we can work through this.
Did she say 3 weeks or was it 3 months that they dated? I don't know. Doesn't really matter. But if I said it wrong, forgive me, please. All right, well, let's adjourn there. And when I come back, I will continue reacting to this interview. I think there's a lot that we're hearing that is worth absorbing and commenting on. So until then, everyone, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.